Skeptic Zone, a miracle of technology. A universe of reason, the Skeptic Zone.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptic Zone, show number 55 for the 6th of November 2009. Richard Saunders here with you once again from Sydney, Australia. We're going to kick off today's show with part 2 of Dr. Rachie reports her interview with John Rennie, the recent editor of Scientific American magazine. After that, we have a short report I made at Sydney Skeptics in the Pub, where I chat to an old friend of mine, William Broom. Now, some of you may know William Broom. He does reports for the Bad Psychics website in the UK. Following that, we have our voiceover man, Jim Wilshire, telling us about The Min Min Man, a lovely little poem. I think you'll like it. And then we've got a real blast from the past, a short lecture given in 1988 at the Australian Skeptics Convention, all about the New Age. Yes, 21 years ago. Have a listen, and you'll hear what the skeptics back then were thinking about the New Age. To round off the show, we have a short report on the Melbourne Cup, the biggest horse race in Australia, where Skeptic Zone member Amada, Rose and I have a lovely day and bet on some horses. Do we win? Do we win? Listen to the end of the show and find out. All right, that's enough from me. Let's get on with this week's episode of the Skeptic Zone.
Now it's time for Dr. Rachie Reports with Dr. Rachel Dunlop.
Hello listeners and welcome to Dr. Rachie Reports. This week I continue my interview with John Rennie, the most recent Editor-in-Chief of Scientific American magazine. Today we continue our discussions and delve into the role of the media in the public understanding of science. I started off by asking John about the general science education level in America and how Scientific American played a role in educating the public. So can we talk about that then? Can we talk about the public perception of science and also the public sort of, literacy? And I know in particular in the United States it's a very big problem in terms of scientific literacy. I think there were some surveys done about, does the sun go around the earth or the other way?
And I have to say, and the answers, of course, as everybody knows, the results in those are absolutely appalling.
Yeah,
they're so appalling that I have to admit I'm always a little bit skeptical of what they actually are. I mean, granted, I should probably, to settle the question in my own mind, really look at the surveys more closely. But I always have this nagging feeling that something is going on that people don't understand the question the way that it was phrased.
So you're basically saying people can't be that stupid, John?
I guess I think that's actually it. I think I don't want to think that at least so many Americans are so stupid that even today that they don't get the idea that the Earth goes around the sun. Yeah. I mean, that is the kind of thing that if that actually represents something that people don't know or don't accept, then, I mean, honestly, a lot of other issues about scientific literacy, you just sort of should throw in the towel because there's, it's like where if you can't get that through to them, quantum theory, what?
Yeah.
No. Evolution? Come on. At that point you almost have to just accept that you're just going to ask people to please don't get in the way of the good education for some of the other people.
Just sort of on that similar theme, you and I were on a panel a couple of days ago at the Northeastern Science and Skepticism Conference here in New York City. And our panel was about science and the media. Obviously you've played a major role in conveying scientific information to the public, but Who do you think is at fault here? I mean, do you think that the media needs to take more responsibility for educating the public about science? The mainstream media.
This is, and I think this was something that came out of our panel discussions the other day, is that I think there's probably no shortage of blame that can be thrown around to virtually everyone connected with it.
Yeah.
That is, it's very easy to point fingers, obviously, at the schools. We should be turning out people who are better educated about science. It's easy to point it at the scientists, that sometimes they themselves should be, either being more willing to communicate or communicate better. But I think certainly, obviously, a portion of this definitely goes the way of the media, and I think that there are real kinds of fault that do lie with the media that. Even if root causes of, say, scientific misunderstanding or ignorance are rooted elsewhere, that they're very badly compounded from time to time. No, and I think what also is very frustrating, this was a point that Howard Schneider from Stony Brook University, who's a well-decorated journalist, that he was making, sort of standing up in defense of the profession, is that he made the point that actually, notwithstanding sort of it's very easy for a lot of us to say, oh, the stupid media, look, they managed to botch these things again, even on things like where they talk about the sort of the false balance issues of, look, every time they run an article about evolution or controversy surrounding evolution, they always manage to get that dopey creationist viewpoint tucked in at the end, too. I think he makes the point that really, almost if you look sort of piece by piece, article by article, a lot of them really actually hold up quite well. At least when you're talking about sort of the cream of the media, the New York Times and sort of other better newspapers or some of the rest of those. I think what makes it sort of a confoundingly difficult problem to address is that sometimes, item by item, things are perfectly good or perfectly reasonable. And yet, it seems as though the body of work, consisting of all those different individual items, somehow has some larger problem. Maybe it's just the fact that even if, say, bringing in statements from global warming deniers deep down and appropriately contextualized inside an article about climate change, even though that's happened and it seems by rights that that's a journalistically appropriate thing to do, maybe in just that happening again and again and again helps to keep alive that point of view in certain people's minds. It is tricky, though, because and I say this as somebody who has certainly made the argument that I think that a lot of science journalists on certain issues should not worry too much about being perceived as advocates. I think that my maybe overly simplistic view of these things is my job as a science journalist is to try to educate people about what I understand to be true and meaningful about things happening in science, which means that at times if I know that creationism is not a real scientific point of view, I feel no particular responsibility in the name of fairness to try to bring that in. I think that there are, but this can get very, very tricky. And one of the things that came up in our discussion is that a lot of articles or stories that appear in the news, television or radio or whatever else, they don't always sit squarely within the camp of this is an article about the science, or this is an article about, say, the social or political controversies.
Yes.
They sometimes have a foot in both.
And they blur that distinction too, don't they?
Right. Well, and
they can.
Yeah. Well, and also the justifications for what you would do in each of those cases. So if I'm writing an article that is very straightforwardly about the science of evolution, there's no reasonable point in there for me to be writing about creationist points of view. On the other hand, if I'm writing an article that is sort of about the social context of evolution, even if I want to, make the point in there, I should make the point in there that obviously evolution is the only scientifically validated perspective on this, still, it would be kind of disingenuous of me to not acknowledge the fact that certainly here in the United States, you've got a lot of people who are not on board with that,
Yes.
and that it becomes a real issue in things like textbook standards. In fact, it would be really remiss of me as a journalist not to mention that. So if I'm writing an article that is trying to do a bit of both and explain some of the science and talk about some of this, people who are looking at that story would say a very scientific lens may really feel like, you're mucking up the story of the science on this by dragging in those lunatics who believe in creation. It's not easy, and you do want to be careful about telling journalists or journalism in general, given what their general mandate is supposed to be, that there are certain perspectives that you should just decide for yourselves you're just not going to bother to include. It's tricky. I don't think, and especially for people who are operating under deadlines and lots of other things, sometimes the wrong calls get made. So it's tricky.
I think you make a really good point, though, there, by saying that if it's a social analysis of the sort of the situation at hand, for example, creationism, or my pet interest, which is the anti-vaxxers,
right,
then I see no reason why you shouldn't include that. But where the line gets blurred is when the science is presented as it is currently known, and then there's a throwaway couple of paragraphs from the anti-vax movement who don't base anything on science. And so as a member of the public, I'm probably going to confuse those two, and there's no reason why I wouldn't think that the anti-vax stuff is science as well.
One of the things we talked about some of the other kind of the really deeply unfortunate misunderstandings within the public, and maybe in a sense within the sort of the semi-educated public about the science. In some ways, they're the people who are most troublesome for all of this, because the people who are genuinely naive about science and not interested in science stay out of it. The problems are the ones who they know just enough science to be dangerous. Is the problem comes up, and I really think this is at the root of endless sorts of pseudo-scientific controversies, is the Galileo myth, which is that problem of, the whole scientific establishment says that it's wrong, but Galileo was right, and that notion that is genuinely wrong, that it only takes one experimental result to completely knock down some huge edifice of a theory. It's just not true. I mean, especially not true in practice. As all real working scientists know, first of all, even in principle, it would have to be one hell of a scientific result to suddenly actually take down everything that was believed about a well-substantiated theory. What would be a result that would take down our, the theory of universal gravitation? What would be the result that we would have to have that would do that? You would need to have an instance of anti-gravity, and it would have to be an instance of anti-gravity that didn't just lead you to amend everything else that you had in science. It actually caused you to have to tear the whole thing down. It would be the kind of thing that said, oh, look, we've been fooling ourselves. There aren't atoms at all. What were we thinking? There are actually, tiny little microscopic frogs. I thought they were atoms. Well, this changes everything. But that's I think, what happens. And people... That's what's so loopy about some of the kind of the would-be scientific critics of evolution or global warming evidence or some of this, is that they will point to their pet experiment or their pet body of work and say, well, if this is true, all the rest of this must be false. But it's just not the case. I mean, in physics, which is as solid and mathematical and rigorous and substantiated a science really as you can find. I mean, you literally predictions come out of different models that can be tested to umpteen different decimal points of accuracy. Even within those, people come up with sort of anomalous results all the time. People come up with things like, well, that's weird. That doesn't seem like right. We would have figured that should have been a little bit different. But it doesn't mean that everybody says, well, tear up your relativity papers, throw out quantum theory. Because it's much more likely in a lot of those cases that your anomalous result is wrong. Or
First of all,
or if it actually turns out to be true, it is probably validated by something that is, a minor codicil that you make to the rest of it. A good example is, and this is like perfect example of an anomalous thing, is it's been noticed that some of the deep space probes that we've been sending out, far out of they're on a trajectory out of the solar system. It's been noticed that they are moving, I think, a little bit slower than they're supposed to be. That's strange. It's like, all of what we know about, sort of the standard gravitational calculations and our understanding of the bodies that are out there would suggest these things should be moving a little bit faster at this point than they are. And it keeps happening over and over again with these different probes. So, on the face of it, that's a result that can seriously knock down some of what you would understand about gravity. Gravity going back to Newton. But whatever the result of that is, okay, it's probably the fact that it's been observed independently enough over and over again shows that it's not just a mistake. It's not just a measurement error. Although I think there are some people who argue even that can't necessarily be ruled out completely. But it's also very likely that, okay, there are other gravitational masses that may be in the solar system that people aren't accounting for likely, and that might be something. But, the most far-out answer is that, well, you're actually looking at something that says that when you're talking about, that sort of astronomical kind of distance, that maybe there are extra terms that need to be added to the relatively straightforward gravitational calculations. But even that doesn't knock down Newton's theory of gravity.
Yeah.
General relativity did not knock down Newton's theories of gravity. It just amended them and showed that under certain circumstances you needed to calculate them differently. And quantum theory, that's the fascinating thing, is that too hasn't managed to negate relativity theory. The fascinating thing is that both of those are clearly robustly very, very true, even though they operate on what are fundamentally irreconcilable sets of fundamental principles about kind of how the universe is put together. And so the great search is to try to figure out how do you make those two things come together in some way. Yeah. But that's just fascinating. That's part of what's exciting about science is not having answers like that.
Yeah, but that's your opinion, John. I mean, the public might say to you, well, but scientists keep changing their mind all the time.
Right.
And this is one of the big problems that I think the media contributes to as well, where, as you mentioned before, journalists have deadlines. They some of them are not necessarily trained as science journalists either.
Right.
And so they might pick up an abstract from a paper and as you would well know, abstracts are often not very representative of what is in the rest of the paper.
Right.
And so one week, cancer is caused by coffee, and the next week, coffee cures cancer.
Right. Well, I mean, some of that, and forgive me if I jump out on what's sort of like a little hobby horse of my own about some of this, is that this is something that when I speak to groups of science journalists in general, I've been pleading with all of us as a profession to try to do some level of rethink about what constitutes science news. Because most of what shows up as science news at the moment is it very commonly defaults to a kind of exciting paper in a very reputable journal this week. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're going to make that. And that lends itself very well to kind of what are in effect sort of little data points in science. The thing that says, broccoli will help prevent prostate cancer. And then a few weeks later, another paper comes out, and it may maybe it doesn't say broccoli will cause prostate cancer, but it may say something like, broccoli will increase your chances of heart disease or whatever else. And so you do get a lot of the public that just says, am I supposed to eat broccoli or am I not supposed to eat broccoli?
Yeah, that's right.
And I think, not to mention the fact that as you well know, science papers are published and then they often, the results just don't hold up, or they just don't have the full significance or meaning that they sometimes did. I think you can sort of it would be sort of an interesting exercise, and no one's going to do this, but imagine if the all journalism outlets in the world decided that they were just going to declare a certain moratorium, that instead of when a paper comes out, it has to be published and be in the news right that week. If everybody was going to say, we're not going to publish it for at least 3 months or 6 months. Because if you did that, it would be very, very different. Because there are a lot of papers that would come up that suddenly nobody would actually care about 3 months later anymore.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things that, other results would be processed and brought in. Now, I think it's really unfortunate that this sort of goes to the problem of the nature of the business of journalism, is that it pushes very, very hard for the importance of things, obviously, like journalistic scoops, and for being very, very competitive and attracting as many readers or viewers or whatever as possible. And, there are lots of things that are perfectly defensible about that on lots of terms, but if what you're looking to optimize is the public's understanding of science very broadly, there's nothing in that model for journalism that says that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You're going to instead get a lot of sort of herd journalism. Everybody jumps on certain kinds of stories because they don't want to be the one place that didn't do that story. You're going to get a certain amount of in some cases, jumping on some things a little prematurely, and you're going to get a kind of a focus on certain kinds of stories that are very, very easy to sell, and you're going to lose a lot of attention to others. So astronomy stories get lots of play in the general press. Stories about animals get a lot of play. Stories about, in a lot of ways, our own psychology often get a lot of attention. Certain kinds of medical stories get a lot of attention. But come on, the sort of the bread and butter material science or chemistry stories, the kinds of physics stories that don't involve things like dark matter or the Large Hadron Collider, things that don't have a certain kind of glamour to them. It's very, very tough to get those a lot of space routinely in a lot of the general press. When you get into the more specialized press, sure, then you can get it, but that's sort of not what the problem is. The problem is that most people think most science involves a lot of astronomy as a result. So.
Well, on that sort of issue of jumping on a paper as soon as it's published, that sort of is partly responsible for what happened with the Andrew Wakefield study, I think, with the autism connection with vaccination in 1998. And I think if journalists had maybe waited a bit longer, done a little bit more research, they may have found out that his previous 2 papers were actually demonstrated to be wrong. And of course, the impact on the public health has been huge in that, and particularly in that example. But when we were talking to Howard Schneider on Saturday at the conference, his opinion was, well, we're just reporting the stories. It's up to the public, really, to sort of work out whether that's right or that's wrong. And what's your opinion of that?
Yeah, I think it's tough. That is. I admit that there are aspects of that point that I can argue to myself both ways. I mean, I always feel that it is a little disingenuous for us journalists to be in a position to sometimes say, well, we don't want to be the gatekeepers. We are just presenting what is going on out there. We're talking about what other people are saying. Other people are the news. We are simply the vehicle of that. And if other people are saying this, we have a responsibility to be passing that along. I think it's disingenuous because the reality is that all writers and reporters and editors, when they are putting together stories of any kind, inevitably you make choices about what you're going to include and what you're not going to include. Even stories that have, that represent a number of points of view do not represent every point of view. They represent what they think are sort of what they will set up to be representative major points of view on this. It's impossible to get all the points of view in any story. And in fact, one of the things that's sort of most misleading is how many controversies are set up as just two-sided. It's A or it's B. Well, yes, it's A, B, and an entire alphabet of other perspectives on this that actually may have more or fewer things in common with those first two that you set up. So it's not the case that when we're journalists that we're always, that we're not the problem on that. We are making those choices. On the other hand, it is also the case that with some of these things, kind of frustratingly, particularly I think those of us who have a lot of interests in science, we sometimes just expect that the newspapers, that most of their interest and most of their stories is going to be that kind of scientific one. But I think a lot of times the editors and the reporters and writers would point out that the responsibility they actually have in publishing this goes considerably beyond all of that, and that there are, some of those kinds of things that they do have to acknowledge, and that the stories are not, as we talked about earlier, they're not clearly sort of partitioned down to here's the science component of this, here's the social component of this, here's the political component of this. Sometimes you do need a smarter public because sometimes your public just don't understand what they're being told. I mean,
Ben Goldacre, for example, he criticises science journalists for the fact that they dumb down things too much. And he says, you watch the news every night and there's detailed reports on the economy and the financial situation, and not many of us are trained in finance or economy, so they're talking about things that we don't understand, but they don't dumb it down. Whereas he thinks that science is too dumbed down. But if the public is that challenged in terms of their scientific knowledge, then maybe we have to do that.
It's a good point. I mean, I do sometimes wonder, there's a reasonable argument that Ben is raising about something like that. I do sometimes wonder whether if you talked to people who are, say, professional economists, they would make the argument, I don't know, that's a very dumbed down presentation of what's going on in my field. So maybe sometimes it's, it may be. But I mean, I'd be willing to concede that may not be the case. The fact is, it is. I mean, there are a lot of attitudes that are very deeply ingrained, maybe wrongly, within a lot of journalism that do cut into some of those questions about what you're going to present. There is a very strong sense that a lot of your public is going to run screaming off into the night if you do start to get a little too technical, a little too detailed. And this is where it's tricky, because I think you almost do want to look. Talking about media or the press or newspapers or whatever else, they're such broad categories that you almost want to take these things on a case-by-case basis. The kind of things that public television audiences might be willing to watch on a Sunday evening may be very, very different from the kinds of things that a different swath of the public wants to watch on, like, its morning television news program.
Sure.
Who was it? Was it P.T. Barnum, or who was it? Someone is credited with saying no one ever went broke by underestimating the intelligence of the American public. It's a patronizing perspective to take on it, and yet a lot of people have managed to make a lot of money that way. And people, I think a lot of times the people who are in these positions to make these decisions, they default to what seems like, well, the safer, more conservative assumption is that people won't actually be very interested in this. So when in doubt, hedge toward the realization that they're desperate to get out of here. And I do think, I say this as somebody associated with Scientific American, which is certainly the antithesis of that in many, many ways. I have to say, scientists are really, in my judgment, as somebody who sits there kind of as the intermediary between the Scientific American audience and the scientist authors who write for us, I think a lot of scientists do sometimes get a distorted perspective about just how fascinated a lot of the public might be with their work, or how equipped they are to be able to deal with this.
What do you mean, John?
I know, it is hard to imagine, isn't it?
That's preposterous.
Yeah. Well, not your work, of course.
No,
that's right.
Not my work, obviously.
But right. I think people that they do. I recall in days of editing articles with various scientists, of really having to convince them that most people did not know what messenger RNA is.
Right,
it's like, and I would say we have to stop and we have to at least explain what messenger RNA is. And, they already bristling against some of the kind of the word constraints that we were already faced with and say, oh, everybody knows that. It's like, I swear to you they don't. I swear to you they don't really necessarily know what genes are. They're familiar in a general way, but the notion that genes make proteins, it's probably worth reminding them of that sort of thing. Yeah. So, I think even if we embrace the idea that the public's actual tolerance for a lot of this and their interest in a lot of the science is significantly higher than maybe in practice we in the media give them credit for, I would say you still want to be kind of careful about that and be aware of the fact that people do have a lot of other interests. It's very, very easy, especially these days, for them to get distracted off by something else. So I think a fascinating thing with Scientific American's readership is seeing that a great many of Scientific American's readers deeply, deeply love articles about very hard kinds of physics. Maybe that's not too surprising. What I think is interesting is that we would do our own kind of surveys about the responses to various articles, and I thought it was interesting to see that sometimes you would get results that said that some of the hardest articles about physics were the ones that not just that readers were most interested in, but that sometimes that they were the ones that they thought were clearest and most compelling, which is fascinating because as somebody who in some cases spent weeks on those articles, I'm pretty sure they can't possibly actually understand those articles in detail as well as they think they do. And I say that not just sort of on my own reflection of that, but basically because of editors and even the authors themselves wrestling with what they were getting into print. It was like, this is really still not always quite as lucid as we would like. And yet people would drink that sort of thing up. Right. So sometimes people really, really do love that and want that in-depth information, and at least some of them, to a far greater extent than a lot of the public would, or a lot of the journalism profession would accept, that they're willing to tolerate not completely understanding things as long as they feel like they're getting closer to that big answer.
So how can our listeners find out more about what you're doing now? Is it?
Well, at the moment, that's a good question. I will probably get some sort of website or whatever set up for myself at the moment, but I think just looking around for my name popping up on things. Heaven knows Google manages to turn things up well enough. Yes,
okay. You mentioned earlier that if you Google you, that you get some interesting things turning up.
Yes, well, it's interesting if you Google for John Rennie and Scientific American, the obvious things would turn up, but you also rapidly you see many online screeds from various people in the creationist community, the cold fusion community, the nanotech community, and of course a lot of people who are great fans of Bjorn Lomborg, the skeptical environmentalist, with whom also had a well-noted set of exchanges over time.
All right, John, well, thank you so much for joining us today on the Skeptic Zone.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
And a big thank you to John Rennie for taking his time to talk to us. If you want to find out more about some of John's previous work at Scientific American, head to scientificamerican.com. And until next time, this has been Dr. Rachie Reports.
Hi, I'm Jason.
And I'm Andrew from the Nonsense Podcast.
Bringing you a skeptical overview of news, religion, and all forms of pseudoscience.
We're defending science and reason against the onslaught of medical and spiritual nonsense.
All week, we are busy researching and debunking pseudoscience. But on the seventh day, we listen to the Skeptic Zone.
Check us out at nonsenspodcast.libsyn.com or search for the Nonsense Podcast on iTunes.
It's the first Thursday of the month here in Sydney, first Thursday of November, and I'm at the Central train station making my way to Skeptics in the pub. The pub for Skeptics in the pub is located downtown Sydney, not too far from Central train station, which is convenient, and very close to Museum train station. The Crown Hotel, the corner of Elizabeth and Goulburn Streets. Now, Skeptics in the pub starts at 6 o'clock, and it's coming up to 5:30 now. Lots of office workers walking the other way towards Central Station as I walk towards the pub. One of the Sydney's trains going by me. And here comes a tram. It's all happening. I think it's quite a good coincidence that the venue for the 2010 Skeptics Convention, which will be held from November the 26th to the 28th, 2010, is only one block away from the Skeptics in the pub. I think some of us may end up there. Well, wouldn't you know it, I'm the first one here. Upstairs in the Crown Hotel there's a lovely big room. It's a restaurant normally, and the Crown Hotel have basically given it to the Skeptics for our use on the first Thursday of the month, because they know we bring in lots of people. They're very wise. And, yeah, Skeptics in the pub, I'm here with William Brew. Hi, William.
Hello, how are you going?
I'm really well. Now, you've interviewed me in the past.
Time to get your revenge on me now.
Big revenge time. So you've been coming along to Skeptics in the pub now for, what, 2 years or something like that?
It would be at least around 2 years.
Now, we met originally in a extras waiting area for Telstra.
It was for Telstra, and then we met again on Home and Away, of all places.
Yeah,
it's funny where you meet people, isn't it? It's great. But I remember when I met you, and we were sitting around talking about astrology.
We were in a caravan.
We were in a caravan talking about astrology,
yeah.
And you were saying to these people, as they read their star signs, do you actually think it's true? And that's when I suddenly woke up and I said, who is this guy?
Yeah.
And you explained where you were from.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
it all took off from there.
Yeah. And you've been, yes, as we say, you've been coming here for 2 years now. You are a bit of a known person. You've been a roving reporter, haven't you?
I have, yes. I do some work for a site called Bad Psychics, which is a UK-based site. I'm based out here, so I do a bit of stuff from Australia for them. And it was through you that I discovered them first, and I discovered you. And I found out that the guy who runs the site, you both know each other professionally.
Yeah.
So we're all linked in that way.
John, yes, of course.
John Donnis. So
yes.
We're all linked. We're like 3 degrees of separation.
And we did something for you. You supplied us with a reading you had.
Yes, a well-known so-called medium psychic from the UK. Can I mention her name?
Oh, yeah.
Sally Morgan.
That's right.
People over there will know immediately who she is. She's got her own TV show. I had a reading from her before she was well-known. And it's the only time I've seen a psychic, and I've seen about 12 or 13, and I've phoned many more up, lost a lot of money, who made me question, she said certain things which rung true. But you actually showed me the tricks of the trade. It was cold reading, a bit of hot reading here and there. And although I still have a couple of questions, I still have not seen the evidence that there's any mediumship or psychics who actually have genuine skills.
It's interesting, though. It really is a case of taking a reading, and it's a long process, but typing it out or transcribing it and then going through it line by line to follow the logic and the threads and the answers and where it leads
it's
and all that.
It's a hell of a long process.
It's a big process, but it's worthwhile in the end. And it's something you can't do in 2 minutes after hearing a reading.
You can't. You've actually got to listen to what the person's got to say. You've got to, as you say, transcribe it. You've got to then examine it, analyse it, and not go in with the attitude that it's going to be fake. Sort of go in objectively and then see, does it make sense or does it not make sense? And of course you showed me that it, definitely for the most part anyway, it didn't make sense.
Yeah, and it also helps you realise how many questions were asked of you and all the rest of it.
And the other thing is, listening back to it, because I actually listened back to it, most of what she said was totally wrong.
Yeah.
And even bits which could have been generalised, somehow I linked it to being true.
Yes,
and of course for me it was true at the time, but listening back, I saw right
listening back, it also gives the opportunity to remember things that you would naturally forget in a reading, like things that didn't hit home. So after a half-hour reading, you can remember, I don't know, a tenth of what was said, because most of what was said didn't.
And you've said it yourself.
Didn't have
You remember
meaning.
the hits, but not the misses.
That's right.
And you've said that many times.
Yeah,
That's something
true.
I always tell people. And I'm amazed. I've got a good circle of friends, and most of them are believers. One of them, his mother's a so-called faith healer. And so we're really good friends, but we do clash.
Yeah.
But even him, I think it's getting through to him when I say things, when I question him. Why do you think echinacea works? What's it actually doing for you? All these things. And it's not about forcing your views on people. It's about making them see that perhaps there's another argument. Perhaps making them question their own beliefs.
Yeah, it's never an easy thing to do. You have to be very tactful sometimes. And sometimes you can't, I don't know, temper gets the better of you sometimes, and you say, "Look, it's rubbish," all right.
Well, it can get very antagonistic. I no longer bother telling people it's rubbish because all they do is disown me. I alienate them. I get nowhere. I say to them, if you want to talk about it, I'll talk about it with you, but that's my view. If you want to know my view, I'll tell you my view. But if that's your view, then that's great.
I do have the rare slip every now and then. Simply, there's a part of me just wants to say it and get it over with, especially at something like the Mind, Body, Spirit Festival, where people are peddling utter rubbish,
I went to one
dangerous things.
Well, I went to one of them last year, and you see these people who come across as all sweet and lightness, light and honey, really friendly. As soon as you start questioning them, their face changes. That happy, glowing look. Yeah. They become really serious because they've deviated from their script.
And their defences come up.
They do, and they don't know how to answer it.
And they want to get rid of it.
And I noticed when you gave them the $100,000 challenge.
$100,000,
rather than embrace it, they walk away.
Yeah, they'll dismiss it.
And if I had something that I thought I could prove, if you offered me $100,000, hey, I'll take it.
Yeah.
So there's something which doesn't add up there. Or perhaps it does add up. I'd rather not explain a real reason why.
That's it, the numerology, it all adds up there.
In fact, when I first met you, they were also not just talking about astrology, but numerology as well.
Were they?
Yes.
Were they? Yeah.
It doesn't add up to me, but that's one of the things about it.
How can our listeners see more of your work or hear more of your reports?
Well, they can see my work on www.badpsychics.com or on my own YouTube channel, which is www.youtube.com/Kensington25.
Kensington25, that's right. You do a lot of video reports.
I do.
From all around the world.
From all around the world. Interviews, most of them here in Australia, but we've got stuff from America, from the UK, from Europe, Asia. Do check it out, and also check Bad Psychics out. That was the site which introduced me to skepticism, and through them I found out about you.
Excellent.
So,
good to see you, William.
Good to see you, Richard.
The sky was velvet black with diamond stars in the night, and the sparkled starlight fell like a gentle rain of light, besprinkling the earth in a shimmering silver cloak, falling on the campsite and bedazzling the city folk. Dry desert air dyed the campfire in glowing embers, and the storyteller told a tale which only he remembers, of a night he saw the Min-Min light deep within the dark, on a distant desert claypan in an earthscape cold and stark. Smiling twinkle lights laughing in the cool, crisp air, and moving like men where he knew none were there, just blinking in the distance, moving closer as he stared. But he didn't move a muscle and was quite unprepared. The Min-Min took on human form and entered his domain. He thought his mind was playing tricks deep inside his brain, and he rubbed his eyes and tried in vain to clear his mind. But Min-Min were around him, and his fear was left behind. They took him starlight strolling across their astral plane, and showed him Min-Min secrets of secret Min-Min pain, unknown trials of tribal nations for thousands of years. And then the storyteller stopped and had to dry his tears. Memories of the light and the night he learnt their tale came back to flood emotion, as emotion would prevail when he told this lost tale from a long time in history, and he filled all the city folk with question and mystery. Then the merest mist appeared at the city camper's sight. Would this be a sacred visit from the gods' Min-Min light? And the storyteller slowly stood and pointed, for he knew the Min-Min men were coming as the light came into view. Like the softer stars on horseback riding across the flat, they were getting ever closer to where the campers sat, and the city slickers paled, blood drained from their faces, as the Min-Min lights arrived and absorbed all their traces. All the city people vanished, but not the Min-Min man. He was left to tell the Min-Min tale the best way that he can, by taking city visitors to those outback points he knows, to turn them into Min-Min lights for future Min-Min shows.
And now come back with us 21 years to the Australian Skeptics National Convention in 1988. Here's Peter Vels telling us about the New Age.
very long, but the first speaker for this session is Peter Vels, who's a computer programmer, and he'll be giving you an overview of the New Age.
In the next 20 minutes or so, probably more like 15, I'll attempt to outline some of the phenomena of the New Age. What is the New Age? Good question. It's not an easy one to answer. When did the New Age begin? Did it begin with the age of Aquarius? Or did it begin with the harmonic convergence of August 16 and 17 last year? Well, in the magazine Maggie's Farm, issue number 36 on page 27, it says that the New Age began with the splitting of the atom. It all depends on who you ask. The New Age is a collective conscious hoping for a rosy future. A change from the modern world of warmongering and planet-destroying science. New Agers believe in a human link-up to change the world for the better. Common themes in New Age magazines are a great concern for well-being of the earth and all life, meditation, crystal power, crystal healing, natural healing, channeling or spiritualism if you like, world peace, communal lifestyles, alternative energy, alternative medicine, human rights, UFOs, pyramidology, radionics, all sorts of stuff. Obviously, in the time allowed, I can't possibly speak on all these topics, so I've selected just a few. Believers in the New Age philosophy also attempt to look into the future in a variety of ways. Some of the methods used are thousands of years old, which makes me wonder just how new the New Age really is. This question will be explored further in a debate this afternoon between the Skeptics and the Mystics, the topic being that the New Age is old superstition, clothed in modern jargon. Take astrology, for example. Astrology, according to my dictionary, is the study of motions and relative positions of the planets, sun and moon, interpreted in terms of human characteristics and activities. In other words, astrologers believe that there's some sort of relationship between where the planets, sun and moon are and human personalities and behaviour. Astrologers claim that specific geometric angles and points of mutual contact formed by the planets as they orbit the sun present continually changing patterns which correspond to unique patterns of potential behaviour in human beings. Some astrologers believe that this correlation is not causal but coincidental, and others believe the opposite. It all depends on who you ask, whether you happen to be a paying client or not. Astrology is based on a geocentric universe, that is, with the Earth in the middle. Now, since the 16th century, most of us have come to accept the idea that the Earth, in fact, orbits the Sun, not the other way around. Until this was discovered, astrology and astronomy were inseparable. Sometimes I think many people still don't know the difference. Next time you walk into a large news agency, see whether the scientific astronomy magazines are alongside the mystical astrological ones. The success of astrological character analysis claimed by believers is universal validation. You hear them say, "I don't know how it works, it just works." The terms used by astrologers are vague and of a general nature, so as to fit anyone who wishes them to do so. If your astrological chart forecasts sickness, perhaps you could enlist the help of crystal power. Like the sale of most New Age paraphernalia, crystals are big business. Many people believe that quartz crystals possess special powers. Quartz crystals are the latest trend in the fashionable New Age world. New Agers claim that quartz crystals have the ability to heal. For example, clear quartz is supposedly the overall body energizer. Smoky quartz is very good for grounding you into your body. Whatever the hell that means, I don't know. Green quartz interacts with the endocrine glands. Pink rose quartz and citrine quartz work on the emotional body. It's claimed that crystals interact with a series of energy systems connecting the mind, the emotions, and the body. The energy supposedly flows into the left hand and out of the right. So, to cure a pain, you hold your crystal in your left hand and you place your right hand on the painful area, wherever that might be, say here. And the energy flowing in your left hand is focused and amplified by the crystal. Comes out my right hand, feeds the cells. Okay. So the idea is that when something blocks the flow of energy to the body cells, the organs begin to die and you become sick. And when energy is brought back to the area, new cells will form, rebuild the organs, and you will become well. Now, this method doesn't work for headaches, Barry, because the problem with headaches is that there's too much energy in your head, or in Tim's head. Right. No. See, according to the crystal believers, there's energy flowing in and out of your head all the time. And if there's something usually emotional, blocking that exit, then the pressure builds up. And this causes the cells to signal the brain with pain. So, this time you place your crystal in your right hand. Remember, the energy flows in the left, out the right. Place your left hand on your head, and your right hand holding the crystal, solar plexus. And then using the drawing ability of the left hand, you suck the energy out of your headache, and magically and mystically it comes out of my right hand and is focused by the crystal into the solar plexus, where the energy can be redistributed throughout the body. End of headache. Marvellous. If you believe that, you'll buy my watch. Actually, the only property that a crystal has that is of any use to civilization is the piezoelectric effect, which is a big word which my dictionary defines as the production of electricity or electric polarity by applying a mechanical stress to certain crystals, or the converse effect in which stress is produced in a crystal as a result of an applied potential difference or voltage. Perhaps the New Agers attribute the so-called mystical properties of quartz to this effect. But other than the piezoelectric effect, there are no other energies known to science that can be directly associated with quartz. In a talk later on this morning, Dr. David Wheeler, a physicist who has studied quartz crystals, will explore this topic further. Any experiments carried out under controlled conditions have shown the healing powers attributed to crystals to be completely unfounded. Another of the latest New Age fads is spiritualism, or channeling. Now, I'll only touch on this subject briefly, as it will be dealt with in some detail by a subsequent speaker, the Australian Skeptics resident channel, Harry Edwards. Spiritualism, or channeling, is the belief that the disembodied spirits of the dead, surviving in another world, can communicate with the living in this world, especially through mediums, or as they're also now known, channels. The mediums or channels supposedly go into a trance, speak in an altered voice, and what they say varies from world-shattering predictions to simplistic philosophies which are made to sound profound by the use of jargon. They claim that the revelations come from the spirit world, or superintelligences, despite the fact that if there is any information, it's either always available from a variety of earthly sources, or the revelations are purely subjective or religion-like. Let me give you an example from Ramtha, as channelled by J.Z. Knight. The earth is in the throes of great change. The power will be more awesome than we have ever known. Where there is dense population, nature will become very active. There will be a radical increase in activity. Strong and wondrous things will awaken us. There will be a warming up of the whole earth. Crops will fail. Deserts will be inundated with rainfall. In the next 4 years, everything will happen much quicker. There will be a melting of the ice caps in the next 4 years. The sea will rise 200 feet in 4 years. Crops on an international scale will fail. It will be perilous indeed. Blah, blah, blah. Now, to hear these pearls of wisdom from J.Z. Knight, or from Ramtha if you like, you would have had to fork out $395, the registration fee for a recent Ramtha visit to Sydney. For the same amount of money, you could get the facts and the truth by subscribing to The Skeptic for over a quarter of a century. You can read more about Ramtha in the latest issue of The Skeptic. It's on sale at the convention. Just over there. Okay. Pyramid power. Pyramids aren't all that fashionable now. But it's claimed that pyramid energy or pyramid power can charge water, sharpen your razor blades and stimulate plant growth. Let me just quote from Carl Sagan. Pyramidology is the contention that we and our razor blades feel better and last longer inside pyramids than we and they do inside cubes. The contentions of pyramidology, under appropriately controlled conditions, have never been verified. The burden of proof has not been met. Like crystal power and the claims of all New Age belief systems, pyramid power is yet to be proven. In fact, I've heard from a very reliable source that pyramid power was invented by Martin Gardner under a pseudonym in the 60s as a hoax and has since gotten way out of hand. Reliable source. On the inside cover of a New Age magazine that I have just over here, I discovered a flat pyramid grid. This is a grid, probably, it's hard to see, I know, but it's 4 pyramids, 4 flat pyramids down here and 5 across the top, making a block of 20. And it says here, here is another little marvel from borderland science in California. It's a flat pyramid grid. The history of this strange diagram is shrouded in mystery. I'll bet. It's not known exactly when or who first discovered that using great pyramid ratios in this concentric squares diagram focus the same natural energy as a pyramid, i.e. none. The grid can be used like any other pyramid to charge water, stimulate plants, sharpen razor blades, and all the uses of pyramid energy. There's a claim here that some of the crew on the magazine have shaved with the same razor blade for 6 weeks. I've got an electric razor too. Okay. In conclusion, I've touched on a few specific areas of the New Age. As I said in the beginning, it's very hard to answer the question, what is the New Age? Maybe at some time in the future there will be a new Age. Perhaps its motto will be, if a man wishes to educate himself, he must first doubt, for in doubting he will find the truth.
This is Desiree Schell, host of Skeptically Speaking. Check out our website at skepticallyspeaking.com and listen to us live on CJSR 88.5 FM in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I now return you to the Skeptic Zone.
Melbourne Cup Day, Amanda.
It's all happening here.
We're at our favourite club down the street where we normally do the think tank from, and it's absolutely jam-packed today with people here to bet on a horse race.
You say it like it's something weird.
It is a bit strange. Now, I've put a couple of dollars on the two favourites, probably a silly thing to do. Who have you gone for?
I put 10 each way on Les Wonder after my first choice was scratched this morning.
Oh dear. All right, well, this is an interesting situation because people who normally don't bet on horses and things, like myself
and me
and you, do so for Melbourne Cup. But that's just tradition, I guess.
Yeah, well, I always bet based on their name, basically, and in 10 years of betting most years, I've come out very far ahead with that strategy.
Really?
Because you only need, one or two bets that come off to put you ahead over a few years, so that's my foolproof strategy.
It's a much better strategy, I think, than using remote viewing.
Yes, as we saw last night.
Simon Turnbull, the president of the Australian Psychics, Psychic of the Year for 2004, was on the TV the other night at the racetrack using remote viewing to pick the winners. And what did he lose? $500?
$650, I think it was. Yeah. Once again, they're too serious about their craft to take Randy's $1 million.
Yeah.
But offer them some gimmick on a TV show and they'll add it like a shot.
Of course, he had an excuse. He said he didn't concentrate enough or who knows what. But in the end of the day...
Although the professional handicapper, the professional better, didn't actually come out much better either.
No, but the one who came up streaks ahead was like you, just betting on the names.
I don't think she's very like me, actually.
No. Oh, well, we've got half an hour until race time, so we'll have a couple of glasses of champagne and wait for the big moment. The horse is up. Getting into the barriers now. It's the big race. People are gathered around the many monitors, apart from the people who are in the next room playing poker machines. I don't think they care.
Yeah, we're both losing our money, but mine's in a more interesting way.
I bet on the favourites, that's why.
No, I mean me and the people in the pokies.
Oh, the pokies, yes. And the horses are being led in now. Can't be too long. It's very exciting. I can't believe how exciting it is. There are balloons and little cutout horses and jockeys around the room. Very exciting. The last horse is being led into the barrier now. The jockeys are eyeing each other off. The crowd, the anticipation's growing. Balloons are flying. We get an aerial view of the track. They're off. It's all over. Who won?
Shocking.
So my horses came nowhere.
No, none of us did anything, unless we came last.
The message is clear. Don't bet.
Until next year.
Well, there you go. I just blew $20, Amanda.
So did I, Richard.
Oh, well, cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you very much for listening to the Skeptic Zone and continuing to listen to the Skeptic Zone. And thank you to those people who are now subscribing to the Skeptic Zone. Every little bit helps. Well, wish me luck, everybody. Tomorrow, Saturday, in Sydney, I'm going to visit the Mind Body Wallet Festival down at Darling Harbour. Will I lose my temper? Will I tell people what to do with themselves? Will I be polite? Stand by next week for the report on Mind Body Wallet. Until then, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia.
You've been listening to The Skeptic Zone. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for comments, contacts, and extra video reports.
The